Dear students, welcome back to Foundations of Law, HOX 6061. So today we'll be looking at some of the other areas of law that have not been discussed in the past. So what have we done so far? Well, we have looked at, if I may check over here, we have looked at the Romano-Germanic system of law, which would be civil law. Then we have looked at the common law system. And so today would be in the next area, and that would be different types of legal systems around the world. Yeah, so some new systems over here. Now, this would comprise of three systems in reality. There is, of course, Islamic law and Hindu law. And if you may recollect, I had mentioned in the past about the American common law system, and we have had visiting lecturers and guest lecturers in the past who had given lectures on that area. So, well, unfortunately, this year I don't think anybody's traveling, so there are no guest lectures as such. But what I thought was, yeah, that's still an interesting area. So I have put it up, and you can read it. It's not from the exam point of view. So the American common law system and the introduction to the US jury system is just for your own knowledge. All right, it's not from the exam point of view, but it's good to know. And of course, the US has its own strange criteria. I mean, they have this federal structure, so then they have the federal courts, and then they have the state courts. And theoretically, the only time when the federal government can intervene is when there is a problem between two states. So if there's trade or commerce or things like that. So otherwise, the state of Montana and the state of Florida, state of California, they have their own entire legal hierarchy and stuff, and they can do everything themselves. It's only when they have to deal internally, with each other as states, or if there are issues like, for example, trademarks, patents, or for example, antitrust disputes and things like that, then you have the federal structure coming in. And of course, there are different court systems as well. So hopefully you can read about this as well. It's quite interesting to see the American legal system and the parallels that were made with the European Union. You see, the European Union is not the United States of Europe. And there's been a lot of debate about this for a long time. And then, of course, now for the last 5-6 years, you have seen the rise of nationalism, etc., etc. But in the past, there were really serious dialogues about how should the European Union evolve further. I mean, should it evolve further? There's a lot of nationalism, of course. A lot of member states have their own ideas or views about how things should be done. And although the European Union managed to create this common market and deal with the transfer of goods and services and human beings and citizens and things like that, there were always some problems, and a manifestation of that is Brexit. And so you can already see here how joining the European Union has been very important and very rewarding for some member states, not so much for other member states. And there's always been this tussle about who pays what, who is more superior, who is the top dog. So the Germans were always on top, and then the French were always there. There was a bit of a balancing act because of the UK, but now with Brexit, that won't be happening anymore. So then you have this divide between Western European member states and then Central and Eastern European member states. Then in the North, again, there have been their own issues and problems. So you can see how, although the European Union has dealt with a lot of issues, continental trade has been a success, and the monetary union has been relatively a success. Schengen travel, freedom to travel, set up businesses, and all that has been a great success. But at the same time, migration has brought issues, internal and external migration, and also how much each country pays to the budget, and how much they get back in return, and of course all these debates. There was a big meltdown, if you may remember, 10 years ago or so, and Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain, and Italy, of course. They all had this crazy thing going on, and so you have this tussle, and of course there's this debate whether the European Union can ever become the United States of Europe. And if that was ever to be a question, then of course the US legal system is quite an interesting way to understand how the federal structure can work successfully in some cases. There's also this article, this little presentation on U.S. juries. Now, juries are a very common law phenomenon, if you may call it so, and very interesting. But of course, jury usage has been coming down everywhere else except in the United States, where it's still going great guns. And some interesting elements about how juries are selected, what is their role, and what do they do. And then, of course, many of the visiting professors and lawyers from the United States who have been practicing law have stated that this jury thing can be quite tricky because who are the members of the jury? These are not like your Stanford professors or Cambridge people or something like that. Very often these are people who have nothing else to do. They're just free people. Could be teachers, bus drivers, clerks, things like that, people like that. Well, of course, everybody is supposed to be available for jury duty, but in reality, a lot of people excuse themselves, and so the only ones you end up in the juries can be people who are really the common people. And these are the people who are entrusted with deciding multi-billion euro disputes. So, for example, there was this Apple versus Samsung dispute, and the people in the jury, it was a shock. Who are these people? So, on the one hand, of course, it means that you don't have this crazy, how would you say, extremely sophisticated or extremely complicated litigation, because it all has to be boiled down to simple facts so that the jury can understand what is being asked for them to decide upon. And so very often the questions can lead to very simplistic answers. Did Samsung steal from Apple? Yeah. So there are Apple's patents, and have they been misused by Samsung? If yes, then Samsung is wrong. Yeah, as simple as that. And of course, we may say, no, things can be very complicated, but that's the beauty of the jury system. And of course, the judge's role is to make sure that the jury is not given fake or false information, and that everything is as per legal requirements. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And of course, jury trials also happen in criminal cases, and so you often come across this a lot of times. Police officers shoot somebody, and then you have a jury trial, and of course, all the facts are put before the jury, and then the jury may decide something, and sometimes it can be something else, and you can have serious problems. Like in the past, I remember in the Los Angeles riots in the 1990s, well, I think 100% or 95% of the jury was white, and they did not see a problem that white police officers were beating up a black man who had broken some traffic signals and was disobeying their directions. So of course you can have these issues, and then so it's a very interesting situation. But of course, as I said, only for your reading pleasure, not from the exam point of view. Very often I have some students who ask, how is it possible to practice law in the United States? Now that's something you can find out. In the past, I remember one of my students, she was Finnish, and then she had an aunt staying in Texas or somewhere, and so she went to visit her, and I think her aunt was also a lawyer in the United States. And then the student wrote a thesis on capital punishment, and a comparison between the European Union and the United States. And of course, that's not really a comparison, because in the European Union, capital punishment has been outlawed, whereas in the United States, in some states, you still have it, in others, you don't. And then, of course, they even have different execution methods, whether it is with an injection, or whether it is by electric chair or hanging. So it's a whole area out over there. Very fascinating, but well, it will be very fake if I try to talk about it. So I'll concentrate more about Islamic law and a bit about Hindu law. Now, why is it important for you to learn about these things? Well, first of all, you're going to become lawyers, or at least you need to have a law background and proper knowledge of legal situations. And so it's wrong to just think that everything happens only in the European or Western context. You also have to look at other areas of the world where there have been civilizations for a long time, and of course they've had their own ways of dealing with legal issues. And well, there are a lot of Islamic countries all across the world, and almost more than 1 billion people who practice Islam. And of course, you also have a situation where a lot of foreign companies set up offices in the rich Arab states, the Gulf states, oil, petrol, dollars. So it's sort of a win-win combination. And of course, if you are Estonian or Finnish, or from Germany or wherever, or France, and then if you have to, handle some sort of litigation or a business deal or something like that, then it's good to know about this legal system as well. Again, very broad outlines. From I have traveled a lot in the Middle East, and I've interacted a lot with many jurists over there. So, well, although I'm Hindu and I have no real idea about Islam, I have had many friends and things. So of course, maybe I could talk a bit about these things. Also, during my law school days, we studied it a bit as well. So, well, from my understanding, Egyptian law tends to be seen as the high watermark. And then a lot of the jurists that I have met from Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt, of course, Jordan, they all sort of agree that Egypt is on par at quite a high level, with good understanding of a lot of Western concepts. And well, of course, there are other Arab states also, and then non-Arab states also. So you have the entire North African country side, and then you have the Middle East, and then many other places. So well, we'll look at some of these aspects here. So first of all, of course, it's very important to understand that Muslim law as such is not an independent branch. It's only one of the many facets of the religion itself. And so we look at this in a very non-emotional, how would you say, very objective manner. So of course, there is the Sharia, and it is the way to follow, and basically it constitutes what we can call Muslim law. Now, it deals with how a Muslim individual should conduct himself or herself, and of course how the interactions are within a Muslim society. And well, there have been a lot of Muslim jurists and researchers, so they have also added their inputs over a period of time. And so it's a very detailed and elaborate system of law. And of course, you can even read a bit about that. There's an introductory note on Islam, just lays down certain provisions. Again, from the exam point of view, of course, you only need to study the lecture notes. So everything else is just there for you to know. So if we look at the structure, it is about the roots and then the branches. So that there's a bit of this hierarchy, this classification, this methodology that is laid down. And when you look at the sources, well, of course, the number one source would be the Quran, which is the sacred book of Islam, and it is a collection of the revelations of God to the last of the prophets. So that would be Muhammad. Then you have, so that's the primary source of Muslim law. Then you have the traditional or model behavior of the Prophet. So that has also been documented, and these can serve as a guide. The number three would be the consensus of scholars of the Muslim community, because obviously, the Quran or the Sunnah cannot outline everything. And so you have some areas which needed to be looked into, and well, so there are some of these aspects. And then lastly, there are the juristic reasoning by analogy, which may be a bit controversial because some sects may not agree to that viewpoint on fundamentalist grounds. So, I mean, Islam has been around since what, the 5th century, 6th century. So, of course, a lot of issues have been dealt with and done. But you can always have some questions which may, be modern problems for which you need modern solutions. So, for example, well, idolatry or worshipping idols is not allowed, and that also leads to a situation where maybe having your portraits made is not a good idea, or being buried in a very elaborate grave is not acceptable in some situations or countries. So how do you deal with a situation where you have to take a photograph for the passport? Well, obviously then you have to improvise, and so you have these 4 sources, and they have been more or less successful in dealing with a lot of issues. And then, of course, there are different sects, different schools. There is the Sunni sect, then there's the Shia, then the Wahhabi, all sorts of, there are many different schools. And so there can be a lot of controversies sometimes. They don't always see eye to eye on certain aspects. So that's something, again, to be careful about. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, it may be a bit different. If you go to Iran, things may be a bit different. And, these are things that as a lawyer, you should be careful about. So the general overview would say that, well, the divine law is complete and no more additions can be made. All right, so you cannot revise the holy book anymore, or you cannot say that let's amend some things. Well, that's not possible. All right, so now let's say in the Estonian constitution, there's been this debate going on, or in the Finnish constitution or the Polish constitution, and you want to make changes to, especially in the Estonian context, who can get married. Is marriage a union between only a male or a female and a female? Yeah. So of course, these are questions in the Estonian context that have been raised recently. They want a referendum on this and things. I believe even Hungary had made some changes. So of course, you can make changes in the constitution of your country, and so that's seen as okay. But what I'm trying to say here is that in the context of the Quran, you cannot make amendments, all right, because this is the word of the God, and human beings cannot change that. So Muslim rulers or administrative departments, offices can only make small minor changes in the way they administer justice or deal with subjects, but they can't really touch the big book, or they cannot make any substantial deviations from certain aspects. Of course, in this context, one must remember that there are some secular Muslim countries. Well, one of them used to be Turkey. Things are going a bit different nowadays, but otherwise, legally, it is still not in the same boat as maybe Saudi Arabia. So, examples of Muslim law and practice today. Again, this is not a very exhaustive review. You're not going to become an expert on Islamic law after this lecture. So we're just looking at some aspects. Now, remember, when all of these things were introduced in the 6th century, they were revolutionary because it was very modern at that point of time. And so things may seem a bit awkward now, but well, that's the price that one has to pay sometimes for no changes. So well, if you look at a marriage, it's very interesting to see how marriage was seen as a contract. It has all the elements of a contract as we understand today, a law of obligations, and of course it's based on mutual consent. There has been this issue of polygamy, so a man can have up to 4 wives at a time, but again there are rules for why that would be the case. Now remember, when this idea came about in the 6th century, it was a different society. There was a lot of conflict, and a lot of men were soldiers who died in battlefields, and so a lot of women were suddenly widowed or single, and so they needed some male guardian or a husband or something like that. And so this rule made perfect sense maybe at that point of time. Again, it's a very complex situation of how one can get married to multiple wives. You have to take permissions from each wife, and also getting a divorce is not straightforward. Now, of course, you should also understand that Islamic law provides that if a marriage ends in a divorce, it's okay, and you can get remarried. And this was not what many other cultures saw as acceptable if you go further east. So essential features of a Muslim marriage, or nikah as they would call it, is there has to be a proposal and an acceptance. So this is very much like contract law, modern contract law, and it should be by free consent and not obtained by coercion, fraud, or undue influence. And if there's a minor who's getting married because his guardian is making the contract on the behalf of the minor, then of course when the minor attains majority at the age of puberty, then the minor can change his or her mind. And you also have antenuptial or post-nuptial agreements. These will be like your prenups. Yeah. So again, very, very sophisticated from the 6th century point of view. And of course, you could also have terms of a marriage contract, and there are certain legal limits and certain requirements. And of course, so this would be a very interesting aspect to look at, just in a very simplistic way. If you look at a marriage under an Islamic context, so it has all the requirements of a valid marriage, and this is just the way as you would have requirements for a legal contract. Then there are some slight diversions. Again, not very common, but one such thing would have been, let's say you are a sailor or you're a traveling merchant and you go all over the world, and now Islam would say that you cannot have sex with prostitutes or something, so that would not be acceptable. And so what is a person to do? I mean, here's a sailor, Sindbad the sailor, and what should he do now? Well, in that case, you have certain concepts like a fixed term marriage in some sects, and this would basically imply that it's like a contract and it's for a fixed term, and at the end of the term both parties mutually agree to part ways. And so you can have a sailor who sails from Arab lands up in, I don't know, Malaysia or Sri Lanka or India or wherever, and so he can do this in a legal way and fully comply with the provisions of the Holy Book, and also fulfill his marital obligations. And then, of course, again, you would have a situation where the man would have to pay a dowry, and there's a financial aspect to the contract. Then you have Islamic banking, again very interesting, especially if you look at the sovereign funds that Saudi Arabia is sitting on, or Kuwait, or the United Arab Emirates. These are in the same category as the funds that Norway is sitting on. It's oil wealth, and it brings in a lot of money. And of course, a lot of money also means you have to be responsible. You can't just blow it all up on whatever. So there's this whole concept of Islamic banking which has arisen, and you have these power centers in the United Arab Emirates and other places, and Dubai, Doha, all of these places. And so, of course, Islamic banking was a very important concept because there was a lot of trade and commerce, and so you needed special documents, bills of exchange, partnerships, checks, promissory notes, trusts, transactional accounts, loans, all of these things which would make foreign commerce and trade more possible and more easier. So Islamic banking evolved and was very sophisticated for a very long time. And then, of course, it has to be in accordance with the rules of Sharia. And one of the basic principles would be that you cannot have interest payments because that would be unacceptable. So this can of course cause problems. Now let's say I want to build a house, so I go to the bank in Estonia and or in Finland or in Sweden, and then I based on where I'm staying. Yeah, so I go there and I get a loan from them. So let's say the house costs 1 million euros, and I get this loan and I have to pay back interest at maybe, I don't know, 10% or something, or 5% or 2% in my case. Well, what's happening here roughly is, let's say if the loan is for 1 million, I take a loan for 20 years and I pay back to the bank maybe 1.2 million. Yeah. So what is the bank earning over here? Well, the interest rate, of course, and so it all adds up to certain sums of money, and so the bank is making a little profit at the end of 20 years. So that's the bank's business. But what do you do in Islamic banking if interest payments are not allowed? Now, well, of course, you can't have a bank that doesn't charge interest, because then how will the bank make money? So instead, what you can do is you play around with it, and so the bank buys the house from you. Yeah. So you want the loan to get the house, so you get the house. The bank buys the house from you and then resells it to you at a profit, and you can pay the bank back in installments. So again, a smart way of dealing with this issue. Um, so again, an instance of Islamic banking. Another aspect would be there have to be certain acceptable transactions, and alcohol, pork, gambling are not acceptable. In this situation, the aim would be that this Islamic bank can only deal with ethical investing and moral purchasing activities. So why is this relevant? Well, Sharia compliant assets about 10 years ago were almost 400 billion US dollars. And so that's a big sum of money. And of course, the market was estimated at 4 trillion US dollars. So you can see how, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Iran, a lot of countries, based on their oil wealth and depending on economic situations, sometimes up, sometimes down, they have a lot of these Sharia compliant assets which are worth a lot of money, but again, there are some strings attached. So this is something to be careful about. Again, under the law, for example, as I remember, in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, well, let's say you have a credit card transaction, you buy some things and then you can't pay back the installments, or the credit card bill. What do? Well, you could declare bankruptcy, and of course, in a European or a Western context, and you can pay back the money, or then sometimes you can't pay back, right? I mean, the state or the bank can take your assets, auction them, and well, if it's a loss, then it's a loss for the bank. But that's not how things would work in some countries, like in the United Arab Emirates or in Saudi Arabia. If you can't pay back your loan, then you could face, a big fine or even imprisonment. So again, you have to be careful as lawyers. There are differences, and so if you are advising your client, you have to look at these things. So it's not like, why should I know about this? Well, it's very interesting because maybe you're a lawyer in Estonia or in Finland after your law studies, and then you have a situation where there's an intercontinental, interjurisdiction, different jurisdictions involved here, and somebody gets married to somebody from some other part of the world, and then as a lawyer, at least you can see how these things work out, especially also maybe in the situation where you have a contractual dispute, and if it states that jurisdiction would be the laws of some country, Saudi Arabia for example, or things like that. Well, as a lawyer, if you have to deal with such issues, you can't tell your employer or your customer, client, that you will not travel to a foreign country. It's a challenging issue, and of course it brings in a lot of important aspects of conflict of laws. So it's good to know these things. Then next would be Hindu law. There was a bit about Buddhist law also, but again, a lot of these things may not really be very applicable, because under Hindu law, well, there are some nuances, and there's this whole structure of Hinduism and things, and the role of casteism and all of these fancy aspects. But in today's India, for example, it's a secular country, so where the court systems are based on the law of the land, and that would be the law passed by Parliament. So of course, what you do see is, for example, with Hindu laws, it's mostly restricted now to family law aspects, and that would be marriage, succession, guardianship, adoptions, and maintenance. Yeah, so these are the only things now in which you have Hindu law visible. Again, whatever the practices were, the customs were, they were all collected by Parliament in the 1950s, and so they turned it out into specific laws, and that's the law that applies now. So whether you like it or not, well, that's the law. So of course, it defines who a Hindu would be, and then it also stipulates what are the marriage conditions, and what are the do's or don'ts, and of course also how divorce can be possible. So all of these are based a bit on certain religious practices in the past. But again, separation is not straightforward and simple. There's a lot of stress on reconciliation and things like that. So it's not like, I don't like my wife, I want a divorce, end of the story. No, I mean, you still have to have some grounds, and so these would be based on certain aspects. But again, if the marriage is irrevocably broken down, then that's it, the end. If it's kaput, it's kaput. The law can be quite flexible. Then there's also a Hindu Succession Act, which lays down, for example, who would get how much and inheritance. So again, what you see over here is this very elaborate procedure for inheritance. And of course, if you want to make a will, how would it work out? So there are no religious courts in India which would apply religious law. So all the courts are now, the courts that are run by the state, and so the judges are legally qualified judges. All right, but it's interesting to see how these issues can come up. Now again, I have dealt with quite a few surprisingly. Well, for some reason, I don't know why, most of my Indian friends who got married to Estonians and came to live in Estonia ended up getting divorced. And for some reason, they always contact me thinking I'm this expert, which I'm not. And so, of course, you can have a lot of issues sometimes, especially when some people get really romantic crazy and then they go to India and then they have this crazy elephant temple wedding on a beach in Goa or something. So everything is fun. And then it turns out that, oops, they want a divorce, and jurisdiction would become an issue. Of course, in the Estonian context, at least I know personally now because of all these friends of mine who have had these problems, Estonian law would stipulate that if both parties reside in a particular jurisdiction, let's say Estonia for the last so many years, then Estonian law will apply, which is not always true, because Hindu law would apply if you had a Hindu marriage. Now, of course, this can be a bit tricky because maybe you're not both Hindus. So how did you get married under Hindu law? Conversions are not that straightforward. So again, it's a lot of complications that can arise. In my case, I'm Indian, Hindu, and my wife is Estonian. So well, we got married, but under a secular law, which was not about religion as such. So even though the marriage was in India, it was quite straightforward and simple in that sense. But if you do get married under Hindu law, then, or if the children are born and you want to talk about inheritance and things, there are some rich people also in India, and some middle class also. I think around 150, 200 million people would fall in the middle class. So the point I'm trying to make here is, it may be a situation where your client let's say a Finnish woman gets married to this Indian guy, Hindu guy, for example, yeah, or vice versa, yeah. Finnish man gets married to a Hindu woman, and so they have children and things, and now well, let's not talk about divorces. Let's just say that the Indian Hindu parent inherits some property. Then from there, how will it come to their children, and things like that? What are rights and obligations and things like that? So these are some of the interesting aspects that come about, which one should be careful about when trying to look at these type of legal systems, because a lot of the legal problems that arise are not in the conventional sense. They can often happen, well, of course, business issues with Islamic countries would require certain aspects, but in the case of Hindu country or a Buddhist country, maybe it's more about family law, and how, what are the rights of children and how to get a divorce and things which can be of relevance. All right, so we stop here for today, and well, this would cover all types so far: civil law system under control, English common law system under control, American common law system. You can read about it. Interesting in a nutshell, not from the exam point of view. Then there is Islamic law. Yeah, interesting, something to know. Then there's Hindu law. Again, a few aspects. A bit of knowledge won't hurt. And now I think we have more or less covered the whole wide spectrum. I don't know if there's any other legal system that may be still there. Maybe in North Korea, or you have some different aspects, but more or less otherwise we are done. Yeah, so we have looked at general definition, basic aspects, philosophy and classifications, different types of legal systems. So we stop here for today, and then from next week we will look at the legal profession and the related aspects to it. And that reminds me, I think last week I already put up homework 1. So it's article related to homework 1. You read the homework article, and then you write a short essay outlining in brief what you think the author is trying to express. And of course, you can add your own views also. And deadline is 3rd November 2020, 11:55 p.m. Yeah. So don't send me an email at 11:57 p.m. saying that you were 2 minutes late or 3 minutes late, or how your dog took your mouse away, or your cat chewed your laptop cable or something. That's not my problem. All right, you had a month to do something, and trust me, if you can't do it in a month, you'll never do it. Okay, so upload your assignments on time in Moodle, and everything goes perfectly okay, and you'll get your grades for it. If you have any problems, send me an email, and I can try to help you out and things like that. Just don't leave everything to the last minute, because nowadays it's coronavirus and you never know what tomorrow brings. All right, so thank you for your time, and have a nice day and a nice week. Goodbye.